tell you this.
The film begins at the crime scene, where a corpse is found on the couch. A team of investigators searches for clues and notices a small specific wound on the back of the victim's neck. Officer Joe calls the chief to report that again there is no evidence. No DNA, no fingerprints, nothing. Joe is clearly concerned about the lack of progress. He meets with his partner Catherine, who is skeptical of his plan. She tells him that bringing in an outsider is a waste of time and resources. Joe insists, saying that this man is not just an outsider, but a good friend with whom he used to work. Catherine remains in doubt, but Joe asks her to meet with him first before forming an opinion. Joe and Catherine travel to a remote, deserted area to meet John. John has been living alone for 2 years now after his daughter died of cancer. He completely isolated himself from the world. Joe enters the house alone, leaving Catherine in the car. He finds John and eventually asks him to help with the investigation, but John refuses. Suddenly, the phone rings in the car. Catherine brings Joe's phone, and he introduces her to John. Joe then goes out to take the call, leaving the two of them alone. Catherine shows John the case file and explains that the agency's rules have changed to allow outside help. She mentions that there were 3 murders committed in exactly the same way. When she tries to shake his hand, he hesitates and does not accept it. Then Catherine puts her hand on his shoulder. At the moment of touching, John has a psychic vision. He sees the blood flowing from Catherine's head. This reveals John's power. When he touches a person, he can see their future. Catherine leaves, and Joe tells John that if he changes his mind, he knows where to find them. After they leave, John considers the offer and decides to help. He meets Joe at the office. When they get inside, Joe explains that John has a gift for knowing things before they happen. Catherine tells John that she doesn't believe in paranormal things. She asks if he offended her, and John calmly replies that he feels the same way about doctors, that they only care about money. When Catherine suggests that he just hasn't met a good doctor, John asks, "Is that what Sam Matt told you?" Catherine is shocked because that's the name of her real doctor. This proves to her that John really knows things about people that he shouldn't. Later, John, Joe, and Catherine discuss the case with the full team. Catherine explains that all 3 victims were killed with a 5-inch needle inserted into the back of the neck. This specific method affects the medulla oblongata, causing instant death without any pain. Catherine emphasizes how perfect the crimes are. There is no DNA, no hair, no shoe marks, and no witnesses, even though the victims lived in secure buildings. They also found a mysterious note at the crime scene. When John picks up the note, he experiences a vision of the killer himself and the crime. This shows that John can also see the past by touching objects. Finally, Joe takes John to the first crime scene. He explains that the victim was a 79-year-old woman. Her landlord became suspicious when she didn't open the door for several days. When they entered, they found her body in an armchair and a note on the table. While they are investigating, Joe's phone rings and he walks away, leaving John and Catherine to talk. John shows her some cards. Looking at the card, Catherine says, "This is a very difficult puzzle." She really only asks one question: "Who am I?" She wonders if the killer is trying to trick them or is playing a game. She assumes that the killer may have a personality disorder, but then notices that murders are too ideal for someone mentally unstable. Joe returns and asks if they found anything. John is silent, and the 3 of them leave. Later, John and Joe eat sandwiches at the food truck, reminiscing about the past. When Joe puts his hand on John's shoulder, John has a sudden painful vision. He sees an operating room, doctors, and Joe screaming in pain. John realizes that Joe is secretly suffering from a terminal illness. That night, John is alone in his room. He thinks about his daughter who died of cancer. He also worries about the visions he's had of his friends. Joe dying of an illness, and Catherine with a bloody head injury. Suddenly, there is a knock on the door. This is Joe. He tells John that an anonymous caller gave them an address related to the case. The FBI team enters the house with John. Inside, they find a note with 4 solar types and times of day written on it. Catherine thinks it might be a Bible verse, but John disagrees. He understands that this refers to the exact time. He looks at his watch and sees that the time when they entered the house coincides with the time indicated in the note. The killer knew exactly when the FBI would arrive. The team searches the house and finds a dead woman in the bathtub. She was killed by the same needle stab in the neck. One officer suggests that she died 4 to 5 hours ago, and the killer wrote the note after, but John says that the killer left a long time ago. He predicted their arrival. Joe asks John to touch the victim to see what happened. John sees a vision of the murder, but he doesn't tell Joe everything. He only gives Joe a strange warning to avoid the water. When Joe asks why, John says he doesn't know yet, but insists that Joe stay away. The officer assumes that the suspect is the victim's husband, David Raymond. During the interrogation, David is crushed. He mentions that his wife, Victoria, wrote a note. Catherine is confused because Victoria was killed, not she committed suicide. David explains that he wrote Victoria a letter saying that he was leaving her for someone else. John, standing outside, picks up a pen from David's house. He has a vision and he understands the truth. He enters the room and asks Joe and Catherine to come out. John turns to David and says, "Your wife was mentally ill. You wrote a note that you were leaving her for a new lover, but you hid the fact that your new lover was a man." David is in shock. Then John says, "And you have HIV." David starts crying. Outside the room, John explains the situation to Joe. Victoria was going to commit suicide after reading that letter. The killer saved her from that pain by killing her first. Joe finally understands why John told him to stay away from the tub water. She was infected with HIV-positive blood. John realizes the grim truth. A murderer is not just a murderer, he frees people from future pain. For example, Victoria also had HIV, and a slow, painful death awaited her. The killer intervened to end her life before the suffering began. The next morning, Joe brings John to his house for breakfast. Joe's wife mentions that they have seen Elizabeth, John's ex-wife, and tells him that she still loves him. Joe then asks John for his professional opinion on the case. John explains that all the victims were terminally ill. They were all supposed to die in agony, but the killer freed them from that pain by quickly killing them. To test this theory, Catherine and John visit the parents of a boy named Robert, who was also a victim. They want to find out if the child was sick. Catherine asks Robert's father if the boy had any illnesses, and he says no, bursting into tears. Robert's mother arrives and angrily asks if they've caught the killer. When Catherine explains the theory that each victim had a hidden illness, she asks for permission to conduct an autopsy. Robert's mother is horrified at the thought of digging up her son's body, but John intervenes. He explains that as a doctor, he has seen thousands of people die slowly, including his own daughter. He tells her that the search for the truth can help them catch this man and stop more murders. Eventually, the parents agree, and Robert's body is exhumed. During the autopsy, an FBI agent runs into the room and hands John a confidential and urgent fax. At the same moment, the doctors find a tumor in Robert's brain. Robert was really going to die soon, but his parents never knew about it. John looks at the fax and is visibly shocked. He leaves the room without saying a word. Catherine follows him, demanding to know what happened and why he is packing up to leave. John repeats the riddle. Who am I? What am I doing? And how do I live? Catherine recognizes it from the killer's note, but John explains that it's not a mystery. It's a line from an opera he was listening to at the very moment when Catherine first brought him the case file. John tells them the terrible truth. He knows everything. He knew that I was listening to this music. He knew that you would ask me for help. He even knew that we would enter that apartment at exactly 4:16 p.m. John shows Catherine the fax. It says, "To Dr. Clancy, check the cerebellar lobe." The killer sent a fax before the doctors found a tumor in Robert's brain. John realizes that the killer has the same psychic abilities as him, but he is much more powerful. He can see much further into the future, and he has set a trap for all of them. John explains that the killer is way ahead of him. Catherine asks if he has given up because he has finally met someone of equal strength. John replies, "No, he's much stronger than me. No one can stop him." He even wonders if they should stop him, since the victims were already dying. Catherine asks if he would have felt the same way if his own daughter had been one of the victims. She immediately apologizes, but John is already angry. To show Catherine how much he can see, John reveals her innermost secrets. He tells her that she got pregnant when she was young, and because her boyfriend didn't want a child, she had to give him up for adoption. He tells her that despite the professional look she shows the world, she is actually a very lonely and unhappy person. Catherine is stunned and heartbroken. Then John has another vision of blood flowing from Catherine's head, and he tells her to leave him, fearing that something terrible is about to happen to her. In the next scene, the FBI finds a new body. Unlike other peaceful deaths, this one is brutal. The victim was torn apart, and pieces of the body stuck to the walls. John tries to leave by bus, but is haunted by visions of Joe's illness and Catherine's injury. Joe finds John and begs him to stay, saying they found a new lead. Joe explains that they found a specific poison on the flowers in Victoria's bathtub. They track this poison to a specific park in the city. In the park, John finds the place where the flowers were cut. He points to a trash can where they find an item of clothing belonging to a previously found victim. The FBI uses a service dog to follow the trail. John warns Joe that they are walking into a trap and doing exactly what the killer wants. The dog leads them to an apartment building. Inside, a man suddenly fires a pistol, injures Joe, and then jumps out of the window. John and Catherine are chasing him. John uses his psychic power to see the future and tells Catherine which taxi the man left in. While they are chasing a taxi, John sees a vision of a car accident where the taxi crashes into a truck and the truck crashes into their car. In his vision, John gets out of the car and the man shoots him in the head. Because John saw this future, he changes his actions. When the accident actually happens, John gets out of the car, but hides behind it. The man approaches to kill John, but Catherine appears from behind and shoots him. However, when John looks at the body, he realizes that this man is not a real psycho killer. Later, John visits Joe in the hospital. Joe confirms that the man they killed was just a puppet, a distraction. John was right. The real killer is still at large, and he wanted all of this to happen. While in the hospital, Joe reveals the truth to John. I have stage 4 cancer. I know you've already guessed that. Joe explains that the killer actually did him a favor. Since Joe died in the line of duty from a gunshot and not from a natural disease, his family will now receive a full pension, and his son will be able to afford to go to university. Joe tells John to keep smiling and return to his ex-wife, Elizabeth. Joe dies soon after. At the funeral, John hugs Joe's son and sees a vision of the boy's future. It's bright and happy. Later, John is sitting in a bar when the real killer, Charles Ambrose, sits down across from him. Charles explains his philosophy. He sees the future and knows which people are doomed to a painful, agonizing death. He calls himself the Angel of Mercy because he kills them painlessly before their suffering begins. Charles admits that he helped Joe by ensuring his death in a way that would provide for his family. He tells John, Joe only had 73 days of suffering left anyway. John looks at the nearest policeman, thinking to call for help. Charles warns him, saying, I have a gun. John has a vision of a future in which the police intervene, but Charles kills both the officer and the waitress. Charles explains that he doesn't want innocent people to die. He only kills those who are already dying. To create a distraction without deaths, John smashes a glass plate over Charles's head. In the resulting commotion, John is briefly detained by the police, and Charles escapes. Using the waitress's description, Catherine creates a sketch of Charles. Meanwhile, John uses his own psychic powers to track down Charles. He sees a vision of Charles leaving a bottle of poisoned champagne and flowers at a man's house. John arrives at the house and finds Charles there. A man living there is celebrating a promotion, unaware that he is terminally ill and that the champagne has been poisoned. Charles tells John that if this man stays alive, then tomorrow he will make his girlfriend pregnant, passing on his terrible disease to the child. Charles asks, Do you really want this child to suffer? John objects, saying, We are not God. We don't have the right to decide. Charles simply replies that he doesn't like the way God works, and then leaves. John quickly tells the man to call an ambulance because he is poisoned. The FBI finally identifies Charles's house using a sketch. When Catherine arrives at his house, she finds a projector playing a video of Charles. In the video, Charles talks about his life and his failures. He addresses Catherine directly through the recording, saying, John doesn't want you to do this, but you will because it's already a foregone conclusion. When John leaves the hospital, he remembers his daughter Emma. He understands that Charles wants him to remember exactly how she died. Charles arrives at the train station and boldly tells the policeman his name, knowing that the officer will call the FBI. He wants John and Catherine to find him. Charles boards the train, and John follows him inside. Charles pulls out a gun and orders all the other passengers to get out. He tells John, We're the same. John denies this. Charles tells him that they have 7 minutes to finish the conversation. During these minutes, John uses his power to see the future. He sees Catherine enter the train from behind, and Charles shoots her. To save her life, John realizes that he has to calculate his movements perfectly. He needs to shoot Charles and push Catherine aside at the same moment. Charles reveals that he, too, is dying, and wants John to continue his work as a mercy killer. When John refuses, Charles tries to provoke him. The train arrives at the next station, and Catherine rushes inside to help. As soon as Charles shoots her, John pushes her aside and shoots Charles. The bullet grazes John's ear, and he falls on top of Catherine, his blood staining her. Charles is killed instantly. Sometime later, Catherine visits John in the hospital. She tells him that she really enjoyed working with him. Before leaving, John asks her to deliver the letter for him. In the final scene, John is in the garden when his ex-wife Elizabeth comes to meet him. She left him many years ago after the death of their daughter Emma. As they stand together, John has a flashback to the past. He sees Emma screaming in agony, begging him to stop the pain. In the vision, John fills a syringe with a lethal dose of medicine and injects it into her feeding tube. Emma falls silent and dies peacefully. The film ends with this shocking revelation. John did to his daughter what Charles did to his victims. He killed her to end her suffering, which makes him the same as the man he was hunting.